The Comedy Cellar live from the table is brought to you by Sheath Underwear, the official underwear of comedy. Visit sheathunderwear.com/cellar to get 20% off your first order. Every order supports the show. So don't forget, that's sheathunderwear.com/cellar. Support the show and support your balls. All right, good evening. Welcome to Live from the Table. My name is Noam Dwarman, and Dan's not here, so you have the treat to hear Periel give one of her, what's the opposite of lackluster? Lusterful.
Look at the camera, Periel.
Lusterful introductions.
Nick Gillespie is an editor-at-large at Reason, the libertarian magazine of, quote, free minds and free markets, and the host of The Reason Interview with Nick Gillespie. He's a two-time finalist for Digital National Magazine Awards for his work.
Do you have any idea what that means?
No, but it sounds impressive.
It is kind of impressive. It's
It
not
is
really that
impressive.
impressive
I mean,
anymore,
it's
yeah.
kind of impressive.
She doesn't know what free markets are. but
I
go
call
ahead.
myself an award-losing journalist.
I like this quote. First of all, be nice. Just because it's your birthday doesn't mean that you get to be extra obnoxious
He's gonna
today.
have a meltdown, right? If he hasn't already today.
He might.
Go ahead.
Nick Gillespie is to libertarianism what Lou Reed is to rock and roll.
Oh, that's
Dead.
very good.
Dead.
A legend.
The quintessence of its outlaw spirit, writes Robert Draper in the New York Times Magazine.
Yeah, that's very nice.
So how's that for...
Very good.
Thank
So I
you.
just wanted to make a comment before we get into the show. So we're talking about Japanese restaurants. We had dinner at Nobu.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, we're about the same age. When,
Yeah.
when Japanese restaurants first opened up, it was considered so exotic
Yeah.
that like the Odd Couple will do a whole episode about going to a Japanese
And
restaurant.
walking through like paper doors.
Yes, and take off your shoes
Yeah.
and eating raw fish.
Yeah.
It was not that different from our notion of eating insects today. Like,
Yeah.
imagine if 20 years from now, everybody ate insects. It was the most common thing in the world. Eating raw fish was crazy.
And it was also for me, my parents who were the children of immigrants, but grew up eating stuff like head cheese and tongue sandwiches. They would be like, raw fish, that's gross. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, half of what you eat is disgusting. Like, at least the fish is clean, right? You know?
It was just, it was, and
Yeah.
do you remember the first time you tried sushi?
Yeah.
Were you nervous about it?
Yeah, a little
Trepidatious?
bit. I did not know what to expect. And it was a little bit different. I grew up, I was born in Brooklyn, but I grew up near the ocean in New Jersey. So seafood was not as scary. And there's like a lot of stuff, ceviche was yet to be discovered in my world, but like certain types of seafood or fish, you would eat pretty lean. Or pretty rare.
A
But
ceviche is actually technically cooked. It's
That's
just
right.
cooked by like lemon or something.
yeah, like citrus,
Citrus.
the acid in citrus.
I love ceviche. You ever had it, Periel?
Yes, I have.
No, but this is one of the most amazing things in American culture in our lifetime. And I think, I know your birthday was just, how old are you?
I'm 62 today.
Okay, I'll be 61 in a couple weeks. And among the many spectacular things that are better about America is like the food culture is so incredibly awesome, like everywhere now. And it is unbelievable, that like when I think about what I was eating in the 70s, coming out of a crock pot,
TV dinners.
yeah,
Swanson TV dinners.
and and now it's like anything goes, and it just keeps getting better and better.
Yeah. All right. So they tried to kill our president. And this put into the crosshairs the one of the issues that's closest to your heart, which is free speech and what can be blamed on free speech, what policing should there be, what social norms should they be, can we blame anybody who spoke freely for dominoes that ended with the assassination attempt of the president. I saw some of your tweets. I don't want to give them away. Just tell us what you give us the libertarian position on all this.
Well, the starting point, and I kind of feel bad. Okay, well, I don't actually. This isn't throat clearing. It's in a democracy, in a functioning country, and not a failed country, political violence has to be denounced every time that it happens because it really is a threat to the system. And man, you think about what would have happened. I mean, like you've seen the reconstructions and everything, like how close this came to, I mean, killing Trump. That's like so fucked up. It's been a long time since something like that kind of political shooting. They happen from time to time. But, at the presidential level, this is like terrifying.
Reagan was the last one, I guess.
Well, he was the who got hit. Yeah, right. Because
They tried to kill Ford.
Yeah, twice, like in a couple weeks, and we'll get to that because that's part of my one of the reasons why I don't worry that much about polarizing rhetoric or stuff like that. But but political violence in a system that has regular elections and changes of power, you have to denounce it, and you have to denounce it now in the same way that I think you needed to denounce it, in mostly peaceful protests. Against, race-based or, racially discriminatory policing practices, all that kind of stuff. Like you have to denounce it because it is, it fucks up the system and it really, it threatens it in a powerful way. Having said that, what set me off on this was that, Trump certainly brought in a bully boy rhetoric into American politics. He really amped things up. And of course, if we're talking about just in the 21st century, how long did it take before George Bush, W. Bush, was being called Bush Hitler and all of this kind of stuff? But I mean, so
and there was a movie that came out showing his assassination.
That's right.
Yeah,
like conceptualizing it. And this, you made an interesting distinction as you were talking between kind of like law and social norms, and we'll get to that in a second. But what set me off was that J.D. Vance, and this was a couple days before he was named vice presidential candidate, he put out a tweet saying, that that Joe Biden calling Donald Trump, a fascist threat to democracy, and like that, this, it would be an extinction. He was saying that Joe Biden is saying it would be an extinction level event if Donald Trump got reelected, and he said, and I think this is a direct quote, that rhetoric led directly to the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And I think that is so unbelievably false, and it is so mendacious coming from a politician who, who doesn't say, I'm going to reduce my rhetoric. I'm going to take it down from 11 and put it at 8. It's like, no, that this other guy, who also happens to be the person who's running against my guy,
and he probably already knew he was going to be vice president.
Yeah, probably. But it doesn't matter, and it's like I flip out as a free speech libertarian especially when politicians start to say, certain types of rhetoric is out of bounds without first acknowledging that they have a role to play in all of this, and that they, I hate to invoke Michael Jackson because of social norms, but they can start with the man in the mirror. And certainly, somebody like J.D. Vance, who won't shut the fuck up about wanting desperately, just waiting to start doing large-scale deportations of up to 20 million illegal immigrants that he says are living in the country. It's like, I don't know, like, go fuck yourself. And the reason for that, though, is that there's a difference between polarizing rhetoric and over-the-top rhetoric, and why people point guns at politicians and shoot them. And I guarantee you, we don't know much about the killer. I guarantee you he's going to be closer to Squeaky Fromm, or even,
who's Squeaky Fromm?
Squeaky Fromm was the Manson family girl who shot at Gerald Ford, or John Hinckley Jr. Like, these are nut jobs. They are not acting out of any kind of political ideology. Jared Lochner, who is the guy who shot Gabby Giffords, the Arizona congresswoman, and he killed a bunch of people, gave her brain damage and whatnot. The minute that happened, MSNBC was like, oh, this guy's a Fox News watcher. He's a right-wing nut job. And they blamed it on a bunch of ads that Sarah Palin's Political Action Committee had done, where she said, like, let's target these douchebags in various states and put out posters with crosshairs on the elections. And it turned out, of course, that the guy, he was like a Keith Olbermann super fan, and he was insane. Like, he wasn't shooting her out of any kind of political ideology that could in any way, shape, or form be traced to what was going on in the culture. So I think that's really important.
I don't know how I feel about it because, first of all, I've always felt there is some relationship between the real world and how the insane people react. I should have looked up. I meant to the details of the guy who shot Rabin in Israel.
Right.
I believe he was unstable in some way.
Yeah. But that may have been more politically motivated. And like certainly
It absolutely was political.
the guy who shot Anwar Sadat knew exactly what he was doing. And it was a political murder because he was pissed that Sadat had made peace with Israel.
Right. So we don't know. Look, listen, you know I'm on your side. Go ahead.
No, yeah. And I mean, just to play to that, like somebody like Sirhan, who shot Robert F. Kennedy, explicitly said, you know, I shot him because he supported Israel in the 67 war. And that doesn't mean he's not insane, and it certainly doesn't mean it's justified, but it's like, that's the exception, though, I think. And, you know, then you get to this question of like, how many politicians have been shot at over, you know, the past 20 years? And it's it's in like single digits or low double digits. And how do you attribute that to the climate?
Well, this is so you made the distinction, which is in my mind, and I think the Trump situation, at least on paper, is a tough case. My gut tells me it's probably somehow just a nut job. But in my entire life, we've seen tremendously over the top political rhetoric that we all knew was figurative. Biden famously said he's going to put you all back in chains.
Yeah.
Blah, blah. Now, if that were true to be taken literally, then if somebody killed Romney, that would be political violence. He's going to put us back in chains.
Right,
We're going to kill the guy. With Trump, it's the first time where the rhetoric was not figurative. Serious people were telling us this could be the last election.
Yeah.
I know serious people who believe that.
Oh, yeah. And they still do.
Yeah. So at that point, if people are supposed to believe these wise people will tell them this is the last election, then this is baby Hitler in some way. And then, so is it political violence or is it not political violence? I guess we'll have to find out. I suspect it's not.
Yeah.
But just to be honest, as I analyze, I say, no, I cannot say that the rhetoric against Trump is just another form of the rhetoric I've always heard. It is, to me, different. It's saying, you elect this guy, the country is over. And I don't mean it figuratively, as I've always meant it. I mean the country is over.
I'm thinking back to when Barack Hussein Obama was, you know, running for president and became president.
Cue the Arabic music. Go ahead.
And I knew a lot of people who would say with a straight face who, like a year earlier, before anybody knew who Obama was, you know, they seemed like rational people. And they would say, you know what? The problem with him is that he's the first person running for president who is actually dedicated to the destruction of everything that, you know, that America stands for. And it was just
democratically, though. He was going to. Nobody ever thought he was going to get the military and have a coup.
You know, there. You know, people in the '80s were talking about. I knew a bunch of evangelical Christians who were talking about people like Ronald Reagan creating FEMA, you know, concentration camps and stuff like that. This stuff goes back in a lot of different ways, and you know, I don't think anybody was saying with Trump that, you know, it might be that like he won't leave office, which of course he did, but like he can't get in unless he wins the election. So I don't know. You know, I mean, I agree with you. Like in a way of social norms. Like there's one of the things that's been being pointed to a lot is there was a New Republic cover story. Yeah, where it's like a famous portrait of Hitler, and they, you know, but it's Trump, and it's like, oh wow, that's, you know, so bold, and it's like that is not only mentally retarded as political rhetoric, it's morally retarded, because it's like, how, you know, I mean, I don't believe that you really believe that, and then what a just kind of denigration of what Hitler actually stood for if you think Trump is in any way, shape, or form playing in the same league. So I think it's figurative, you know, and I condemn that kind of rhetoric, I think, because like that isn't what I traffic in. I don't say, you know, this, I don't know if I've ever said, you know, this last thing, this is the thing that will pull the thread apart. You know, if we, you know, and I hate so many things about the contemporary government. I hate the Federal Reserve. I hate the minimum wage. I hate, drug prohibition. But like, I don't think I ever say, if this one thing happens, then it's game over. So let the shooting begin.
Well, let me tell you why I don't think it's figurative. And some of this, you just have to do a gut check. All the stuff you're saying, I heard about Obama too, but I never felt anybody really thought the country was in the balance. More just a terrible pivot in a direction was in the balance. But we've heard we saw that Trump pressure tested the law to try to stay in office after the 2020 election, January 6th and all that. And now we hear people saying this time he'll appoint the people who will do what he wants to do.
Including J.D. Vance, because famously Mike Pence
So that's not figurative.
refused to go along.
That's not figurative.
Yeah, but
he almost got away with it this time. Next time he will get away with it.
Yeah, but I mean, that's all in the service of getting a zombie president reelected, right?
Yes.
I mean, I think this is all in a political context of election. And
Well, shame on them if they don't really mean it. Fuck them.
I agree with that.
It's ridiculous.
But I also agree that, I mean, it's, and I'm not just saying, it's all whataboutism, but there's a lot here of like, for conservatives, do they really believe in rounding up, 20, what they claim are 20 million illegal immigrants and kicking them out of the country? Because they say that again and again. And if you don't mean that, then stop saying it, because that's repulsive. And I could see that trigger. I mean, if we're going to say, you take rhetoric, if there are 20 million people in the country who are about to get rounded up and put in cages and dumped into the ocean or over the border in Mexico, like, I guess they'd start shooting or they'd start fighting back, right? And they would have a claim to, right? Because
they
it's
definitely
lights out
mean
for
to
them.
round up some number of them.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like this is rhetoric. It's shameful, and it's one of the reasons why people hate politics. It's why independents are, at a historically high level of percentage of the electorate, because who wants to be a Republican or a Democrat when you have to in order to show you're part of the gang, you have to make these insane testaments about stuff that you clearly don't believe.
So just to add to this, Michael Shermer.
Yeah,
the guy.
I had dinner with Michael Shermer recently in Vegas.
I met him in Arizona. Very smart guy, right?
The Skeptic. I mean, he runs the Skeptic,
and he's a thoughtful guy, and I believe he's basically of the disposition that we are about free speech.
Very much so.
But he tweeted, "There is a price to reckless speech that portrays public figures as threats to the American way of life. It can be the spark that helps push an assassin to act. It is impossible to separate the violence of political assassinations in modern American history from the temperature of the times."
Yes, I think it is. I think you can. And so, for instance, what or do it the other way around. Like when there are assassination attempts or successful assassinations, is it because of the temperature? I don't know. Was Kennedy... what was going on in the country, and there had been the Cuban Missile Crisis and things like that. But when Lee Harvey Oswald popped JFK, one of the things, and if you go back and look at the contemporary commentary about all of that, it was like, there was a reason why Kennedy was going to Dallas and to Texas, and it was because there was a climate of right-wing hate, and he was disliked, and he was running for re-election, and he wasn't doing that well. And everybody kept talking about the climate of right-wing hate, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, he was killed by a self-described Marxist-Leninist who, had been handing out pamphlets for fair play to Cuba, who had actually defected to the Soviet Union. It had nothing to do with a climate of right-wing hate.
Well, I will make the following analogy to climate change. We know, the smart people among us know, that you cannot assume that any horrible hurricane is a result of climate change. You can 100% believe in climate change, but we've always had hurricanes. We always have record-breaking hurricanes. You can't make any assumption. You can only make that assumption, and the analogy would be, Yes, but even in the best of times, the Secret Service still takes its job quite seriously because we don't assume the president is safe as long as the temperature isn't high. We assume that
Or even when there's no when everything it's San Diego and it's 72
that's
degrees.
right. We
all
always
the
assume
time.
that there are always people out there
Yeah.
who want to kill the president to give him a chance. So you can only begin to feel confidence in these judgments through the frequency that they happen.
Right.
20 hurricanes and a whole spate of political violence. I think then, but you can't make any judgment on one guy who tried to kill the president.
I also and I've talked about this on the Reason Roundtable, which is another podcast I'm on. That when I look back at the 70s, and I don't remember it because I was a kid then, but when you look at political violence in the 70s in the United States and in Europe and throughout the world, there was a lot more of it, and there was more of it because the Cold War was at one of its high points. So you had both American kind of free world people and Soviet people kind of pushing buttons and kind of stoking stuff. But you had groups like the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the IRA. You had the ANC working in South Africa. There were a lot of international groups that were yoking up, sometimes for legitimate reasons. I think, you got to say, in South Africa, was political violence justified? Yeah. I mean, and then you can always say not against civilians, et cetera, because, something like the IRA, in a way, I understand an armed response to British occupation of Ireland, but I don't condone blowing up babies and people in discotheques and stuff like that, or claiming on 9/11 that there are no non-combatants. Like that's insanity and needs to be rejected out of hand. But in the 70s, there was the Weather Underground in the United States. There was the Symbionese Liberation Army. There was a lot of bombings that were happening on a regular basis. There was a lot of violence, and there were large-scale rhetorics, not of and everybody thought Nixon was Hitler, or McGovern was a stalking horse for the Soviet Union or whatever. But the violence that was there, I would be more worried if we were in a time like that and something like this happens, or you start to see a spate of this. But I don't see that. And that makes it, I don't feel good about any of this, but I don't worry about this, and I don't link it to contemporary rhetoric.
In your gut, do you feel that there's some relationship between the BLM riots, then January 6th, does it become normalized in a certain way? Would January 6th have happened outside the context of all the rioting that happened in BLM? We don't know the answer. But
No, I think that's a great question, and I kind of don't think it would have. In the same way, I don't think the riots in response to George Floyd would have happened nationally if it hadn't been for COVID lockdown. So, there's a lot of interlocking pieces, but I think January 6th was overblown. I mean, I think it was awful, and I think the people who broke the law should be penalized. I don't think that, I don't think Trump was directing it, and I don't think it was an actual attempt to, take over the government. I mean, that would be pathetic if it were big, fat, militiamen who were like, we're going to take over the government, but we're going to leave our guns in Virginia, because otherwise we'd be breaking the law if we brought them into D.C. and things like that. I mean, and it's ugly and it's serious, but it's not, it isn't an insurrection. But if this stuff had continued, and if crime had continued, I mean, one of the most amazing things besides over the past 60 years, just how much better food is in America. What's amazing is over the past couple of years, we've seen a rapid decline in crime basically across the board everywhere in the country. And so I think, the fever pitch that was growing because of the pandemic and because of George Floyd and BLM, which I think protests against policing, always legitimate. Protests against anything, protests even by, people that I disagree with completely, as long as it's peaceful, that's always good. Mm-hmm. But I think the criminality that was kind of clinging to the edges of that's actually faded in a way that should make us feel a little bit safer about what's going to happen.
on January 6th, sometimes I have like a way of seeing things that I wouldn't say it's unique to me, but I don't hear other people saying it. I wonder, what's the matter with me? No one else is saying this. I must be wrong. But my take on January 6th has always been, in addition to the fact you can't take over the United States government by taking over the building or even by disrupting a congressional. No, I mean, that's not how it's done. That what came out was that Trump had a cynical, bad faith legal strategy that was going to test this election. In that speech that Giuliani gave, where he said we're going to have trial by fire. He meant trial in the courtroom.
Right.
And then January 6th happened. And then Trump had to concede the election on January 7th, meaning that January 6th was the one thing that upended the whole strategy that he had to take over the country, as it were.
And he was desperate to find a way. Like there's the phone call with the Georgia Secretary of State, like, you got to find me these votes and all of that kind of desperate, gambits and stuff like that. But, the fact is...
By the way, today I listened to that whole phone call. Have you listened to it?
I did when it happened, when it first came out. I haven't revisited
I don't think there's any way they're going to convict him on that phone call. But anyway.
Yeah, no. I mean, because he's like, it's kind of like, an electoral booty call. Like he's just begging for sex and it's not going to happen. And then he doesn't push it, right? Like, or what's he going to do, I do think in a way, I've never voted for Trump. I don't expect to. I'm not going to vote for Biden. And that doesn't make me pure. It just, I wish there was a major party candidate that I felt comfortable voting for. But I do think in many ways it disqualifies Trump, like his actions as they've come to light. Like this is a man, to the extent that you want to believe the argument that character matters. And I'm not sure that it does. To be honest, but like if it does, he doesn't have it. And having said that, I've said this consistently, like I think Trump was a better president than Hillary would have been. I wish he had won in 2020. And I expect him to win this time, and I think it will be a better outcome than Biden. But he really, the Republican Party should be ashamed of themselves, as the Democratic Party should be ashamed of themselves for running Biden. Like if these are the choices you're giving us, you got real problems.
The problem is that the notion of being disqualified, it sounds good, but in reality, in a democracy with self-government, nobody's disqualified for anything. Ariel Sharon did all the stuff with Sabra Shatila and all those people. He didn't kill them, but blood was on his hands. He should have been disqualified. He became prime minister of Israel, and a good one. And we personalize the presidency, and we hang all these accusations on them, and we attack their character, and they've done things which are over the line. But then, of course, people whose lives are actually affected by the policies that these people represent, and they can be diametrically opposed. They say, listen, I guess he should be disqualified, but you want me to lose my factory because he should be disqualified? No, I'm going to take the guy who's disqualified.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and you don't.
You want me to outlaw abortion because your guy, doesn't work that way.
Yeah, or you want me to outlaw abortion, and that means I got to vote for somebody and I don't know if he can sue me or not. Like he can, but if there is a presidential candidate, and I guess you throw in Robert F. Kennedy Jr. There's probably more than one in this race, but who has paid for a lot of abortions. We're assuming it's Donald Trump, but he was the guy who was going to, get Roe versus Wade overturned. So I understand why Christians or people where that's their one issue, they're going to vote for Trump, even if he goes out on Fifth Avenue and murders a bunch of people.
I mean, if there's anything that I really think somebody should be disqualified for, it maybe just my own personal lack of tolerance for this. There was an article in Reason Magazine about it one time. It was Kamala Harris and the shenanigans that she was guilty of to try to knowingly keep innocent people in prison.
Right.
There's nothing Donald Trump has ever been accused of, which cuts me like that. That's like Fidel Castro level shit.
Yeah.
And nobody's saying she's disqualified because as long as we pretend it didn't happen, we don't have to deal with that, right? So fuck them. They're all full of hypocrites.
Well, for me, this is, and again, the assassination attempt is like super important. And you mentioned like the Secret Service in passing.
Oh, we got to talk about that because unbelievable.
A real failure of them and the local police to like do their basic job, right? I mean, this, and we shouldn't forget that. And a lot of the school shootings, like the one in Florida and everything like that, and the one in Texas, what really the biggest story might be the way that law enforcement does not do it doesn't execute its task.
Now, is there go ahead, you have a point you want to finish?
Yeah. I was just going to say that the real outcome of a lot of this, and it's not just this moment, and it's not just this election, and it's not just post-presidential debate where, Biden, like the people who are Biden supporters are shitting their pants because they realize like they are, whatever they're doing, they're deluding themselves. It can lead to a nihilism in America where you say like morality doesn't matter. One choice is the same as the other. And this, we've been in it for, 50 years. We've been moving from relatively high trust to relatively low trust. And you don't want to live in a low trust society. And it's not inevitable. And it's mostly centered around politics because politicians have again and again been shown to be, not just personally hypocritical, but like to be liars and cheaters and refusing to own any of their mistakes when it comes to policy, when it comes to COVID, when it comes to, economic policy after the financial crisis and what created the financial crisis. It's like this is where we need to have a discussion. And I don't want to say, so you can't call anybody Hitler or Stalin or anything like that, but what we need to have is a political rhetoric that accounts for the reason why people have historically low levels of trust and confidence in government is because of the way government is acting. It's not any of us. We're just trying to get on with our lives. It's the people in office, the policies they pursue, and their refusal to acknowledge when they're guilty of failure.
And the irony of that, and actually brings me to my next point, is that the public likes when somebody says they were wrong and takes responsibility. These politicians avoid mea culpas as if it's bad for them politically. It's good for, in my opinion.
Sometimes, I mean, this was the, in a way, and I think Trump perfected this more than anybody, but Bill Clinton in the 90s, as his personal scandals and a couple, political ones were starting to pile up. The Washington consensus at the time, and I was kind of new at Reason, so I remembered we covered this extensively, as did everybody, but everybody was saying, like, he's got to resign. Like, he's got to get in front of the scandal and confess and admit he was wrong and take his lumps. And then at various points, people were like, he's got to resign. He's got to resign. Nixon resigned.
Right.
He's got to resign. And Clinton, he was like, no, I really don't. And, he waited everybody out. And it was like, people are, all right. And then he just, continued. And I think Trump is cut from that kind of, he's cut from, he's out of the same gene pool where he's not going to, he's not going to apologize for anything. He's not going to admit that he's wrong. And he's just going to keep going. And then he'll talk as if he was always this
way.
But
he didn't have sex with Stormy Daniels, so what should he apologize?
Yeah. Now, why would he? She was horse-faced. It's, I mean, it's like,
what if
it's disturbing. And Biden, if I just may, Biden was, he was against the Vietnam War. He was for the Vietnam War and against it. He was, for Iraq and against, and like Biden's entire career. There's a very good piece by Martin Gurry at the Free Press. I think it came out today, where he's just like, Biden over his career, which is like the longest career, certainly he is the Methuselah of contemporary American politics. And it's like, it has been all over the place. Like he does not have, he is not a very stable genius. You got to give it to him because he's, he's the president of the United States. And he's been in politics. He took office first in 1973. It's like he's part of the furniture, but he just flips all the time.
Imagine if Biden said, look, when we took over after COVID, everything was in disarray. We had the best minds. They told us that we could spend this, we could have this program and it wouldn't cause inflation. Larry Summers actually warned that it might cause inflation. And you know what? In retrospect, we probably did cause some of that inflation. But we'll learn our lessons and we'll be more careful with these things in the next administration. We're going to take it to heart. We're not going to, rather than no, everything's fine. You have just as much money as you've ever had. You shouldn't be complaining about prices.
And in the presidential debate, the first thing he said, he misrepresented the statistics of unemployment and inflation when he took office. He tripled each of them. And again, I was going to say I don't want to both sides it or whataboutism, but it's like each of these guys is terrible in their own way. I happen to think, and again, I say this where I don't think people should have to stop calling Trump Hitler or worry and project their stupid fantasies that this is the end of everything good and decent. That fruit will never ripen if Trump gets reelected. Everything will taste bad. Our cars will turn to sand. Whatever fantasy people want to have, I don't think that's going to happen. I think Trump would be better because the mix of him getting elected, and then I suspect that what will happen is people will balance things out because everybody understands now. Nobody is projecting, the Republicans are going to take over because they have such a great and refreshing and persuasive, comprehensive program to make America great again. It's Trump will probably get elected, and it'll be 2 years ago, in the midterm elections, the Republicans should have massively taken major majorities in the House and the Senate, and they didn't because they fucked up and they ran a bunch of idiots in easy races and lost a lot of seats.
So getting back to the Secret Service, because this is, I had been resisting getting into it, but I think I'm going to have to because things are kind of just bubbling up, and the story seems incredible. The debacle, the incompetence. However, let me just start to put it in context. In Israel, on October 7th, 2023, Hamas got in there for 7 hours, killed 1,200 people in a country which is hyper vigilant with the best military on planet Earth. So ridiculous things can happen. So in that context, this seems like a relatively minor level of incompetence. And yet, when you see this head of Secret Service, this woman with no apparent qualifications, and you see this 5'2" woman trying to hold up the president, and then you see the sum total of all these other things that have caused us to lose trust in our institutions, one does wonder if this is just a degradation of our ability to do things properly because we're concerned with so many other factors.
I don't, I think it's a Secret Service failure, obviously, when anybody gets a shot. And it's, and there seems to be a lot of, there were people there saying, hey, there's a guy on that roof. Why don't you check that out? And there's the AP reported the day of or right after that local police, I guess, had gone up and seen the guy on the roof. And then they were like, oh, but, where's our guns? We got to go back to our guns. And that's when the guy started shooting and they got killed. What's going on? And I don't, I am not yet in my structural engineer phase of the 9/11 analog of where I understand whether or not jet fuel can melt, I-beams and stuff like that. But it seems, we know that this was a failure of security and, the stuff that's coming out. It seems like, the Secret Service is, fucked up.
I mean, I saw the photo today. It's just a roof right there.
Yeah.
And I read that there's a slight slope to the roof, and we didn't put somebody up there because the slope was dangerous.
Yeah.
But then I saw the picture. It's a little gentle slope.
Yeah.
How and then.
If you're suggesting this is because of DEI or because we have to let trans athletes swim in the NCAA or something like that.
I don't know.
I mean I doubt that, and it's I know that virtually every social service that the government is offering is getting crappier, and I mean we're in New York, and I'm sure you saw that press conference where Eric Adams was like, hey, here's the new garbage cans, the rat-proof garbage cans.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it's kind of this, we're living in a bizarre world where things are actually pretty good, and they're better than they were like a couple of years ago in terms of crime, in New York and everywhere.
Although we had two
And it's-
robbings at gunpoint on McDougal Street and then on
Wow. Yeah.
Thompson Street in the last 2 weeks.
Okay, but I'm just saying,
they are
like,
better.
we clearly are living in a post-competency world
Yeah.
in almost everything that we're talking about.
I don't know. I mean, I would like to. I mean, it's a predictable result of these policies. Everybody said it that you see a woman there. She worked for Pepsi Cola prior. Is that right?
I did. Yeah, I don't-
Something like that.
and if you're not even hiring from like Coca-Cola, if you're going with Pepsi,
She worked for some company. You should Google it, Max, where she worked. And you see a woman in charge of the Secret Service. Of course, I have no problem with a woman in charge of the Secret Service.
Yeah.
But I'd prefer it very much if I could see the woman in charge of Secret Service. Oh, she must be a hell of a woman.
Right.
Rather than saying, did they just look around, especially what comes from the Biden administration? Oh, they had to hire a woman. And then when you look at her background, it's not like she came out of the CIA or some sort of military thing.
Kimberly H. Cheadle.
Yeah.
1 second. That's
Oh,
her name.
she does this all the time. You think she would have had it all?
Yeah, it was Pepsi.
Pepsi.
Okay.
And what was her position at Pepsi?
She was an executive.
an executive of Pepsi. I wonder, what did she like handle Mountain Dew at least, like one of the spicier brands?
I mean, on its face, you say, why did you hire an executive from Pepsi to be in charge of the Secret Service?
But, so just to go, yeah, and I mean, I'm not like it's fucked up.
Maybe you can Google who the previous ones were and what their resumes were for comparison.
Remember, like who ran FEMA under George W. Bush? It was
Brownie.
way to go,
the
Brownie. Heck of a job, Brownie guy who like had run the American Association of Arabian Horse Breeding or something. The guy who was put in charge, the doctor who was put in charge of MK Ultra, the mind control program that the Defense Department and the CIA did after in the 50s into the 60s, where they started dosing people with LSD without telling them to figure out.
I just learned about that last week.
Yeah, no, and it's like read Poisoner in Chief. The guy had no qualifications for that. The people who were in charge of torture in Afghanistan, they were like dentists or something. I mean, like whenever you look into this stuff, it's just a wilderness of error, I think.
And yet, in the 40s and 50s and 60s, there were a lot of competent people.
What I know, but you're saying that like who, like Robert McNamara, right? Who went from running General Motors to running the Vietnam War disastrously.
Running General Motors is not.
No, but it was but I mean, this is that you.
Rex Tillerson was going from Exxon to be Secretary of State.
Yeah, that's.
She was the senior director in global security at Pepsi, to be fair, and she also.
What does global security mean at Pepsi?
I mean, I
maybe
don't know,
it means
but
something.
for more than
Yeah.
25 years, including on Biden's security detail while he was vice president.
Okay, fair enough.
I
She
mean, you guys
sounds
are
like she-
making her sound like she was like running like a vending machine.
Yeah, she emptied. She had a big route, where she would go around and empty vending machines.
In a statement announcing her appointment, Biden said he, quote, had complete trust in Cheadle, to whom in
Well, she didn't screw up on
2021
his detail. Look, and also
Yeah.
now conspiracy theories. Maybe we're going to run out of time soon. You've seen the conspiracy theories that are going around.
Staged was trending on Twitter within like actually it would have been great if Staged was trending on Twitter like 2 minutes before the assassination attempt, but
I mean, serious people I know are open-minded that this was a conspiracy, that maybe
Yeah.
Biden was in on it. I mean,
yeah, I've seen mostly from hardcore kind of right-wing sources, and I think it's trolling, but saying that, Biden had been kind of short-sheeting the Secret Service deployment for Trump all along, and they won't give it to Bobby Kennedy Jr., who comes from a family where it's like, if you're not flying the plane into the ocean yourself, you're getting killed, or driving the car into the water, and this to me might be like a new level of stupidity where, you say like smart people I know, or people who are not clearly in the booby hatch, are starting to say, no, come on, you have to understand. And like this, I saw a lot of this with COVID. I saw a lot of this, with all sorts of things in the 21st century. And it's like, it worries me when, people who seem to be kind of serious are so desperate to maintain their rapidly deteriorating world and framework that they're
The whole thing disturbs me very much. Tucker Carlson is sitting a few chairs away from the president.
Yeah.
And we've talked about, I think, before. Tucker Carlson goes on his show and says that the American government is keeping a secret about supernatural soldiers of Satan who kill people that appear to us as UFOs. You would think that would be the end of Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
But it's not, and he has 20 other conspiracies.
Yeah.
It's outrageous.
Candace Owens says Macron's wife is a man, and Tucker goes on Joe Rogan and says that Alex Jones is a supernatural prophet. And Joe Rogan won't go that far, but Joe Rogan says, well, yeah, he is, he gets a lot of things right. There's something going on there. And then Joe Rogan says that the Jews killed JFK because he was going to make AIPAC register as a foreign agent.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and all of this is just becoming too acceptable in polite company, as it were.
Yeah.
And I think it's fucking dangerous.
What do you think is driving that?
I don't know.
Yeah, because for me, it's it's harder. Well, here, let me try a meta theory on this. And this was easier to do like 15 years ago, but it was there was a wide appreciation for the idea that older institutions and kind of centralized institutions of power, both in the government but also in the private sector, like big corporations. We understood that it was harder and harder for the Federal Reserve to really pump up or pump down the money supply or prices and whatnot. That it was hard for governments to really control people because we all have so much technology and kind of wealth, and we can kind of figure out how to do whatever we want. Churches couldn't make people show up anymore. And I think that that's still true. And it's not all, it doesn't mean it's all clear sailing. It means that like a lot of stuff that we could depend on and rely on gets disrupted, or we haven't quite found out how to get to the next level where we don't worry about this kind of stuff. We're in a liminal space between the past and whatever the future is going to look like. And I think people in politics, this has become harder and harder. Like we haven't in the entire 21st century, we haven't had a stable governing majority of, where the White House has, the same party as the White House, Congress, both houses of Congress for a long time. It keeps changing every 6 years, typically every 2 years or something like that, because it's harder and harder to control things. And in those moments, people start to glom onto conspiracy theories to kind of give themselves psychological succor to, make it through the day. Because think about it, like if you were, if you're a Biden supporter, like, man, that's got to be hard because, and we saw all of this for the past couple of months where it's like, oh, those are all cheap fakes. They're deep fakes. It's like, they're zeroing in on Biden and it's unfair, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, you just wait. And then that debate, and even the people who, even Jill Biden was probably like, we gotta fucking get rid of this guy. And, so they're flipping out. And I think a lot of people didn't believe that Trump could win, didn't believe that Trump could come back, et cetera. And so there's a lot of freakouts.
Look, we all believe in democracy, but we may be we're going to have to learn how to be quite as democratic as we are now, especially with the free flow of information. We did used to lean a lot on gatekeepers. I'm sure that whole chapters of history that we believe are completely untrue, but they were picked from the more responsible, smarter, more staid circles, and they kind of told us what to believe.
I don't agree with that. I think that they were picked from certain groups.
Walter Cronkite would be out there saying Trump is Hitler,
Well, no, he probably would be at this point.
Yeah, maybe.
And was it a better world when Walter Cronkite got 50% of all TV viewers watching him? He was a bullshit artist, and he was a mask for power. This is where I'm not just libertarian, but I'm also very antinomian. Like I don't like the establishment. I don't like power because it always masks itself as correct or smarter. And like the fact is, it's not smarter. And I feel I'm very happy to have grown up, even if we are kind of like, little fires everywhere are breaking out. It's like I would rather live in this world than a world where you couldn't find out what was true or what was not true, and you had no options around that. I was going to say,
I agree with you. Go ahead.
two points that might make you feel a little bit better.
And then I got to read the sponsor thing. Go ahead.
Okay.
I forgot.
But one is that we worry about democracy, but compared to like the year 2000, so many more people are participating in elections legally. There isn't a lot of voter fraud or anything like that, but the voter participation rates are way, way up across the board. So this is what democracy looks like. It wasn't the old thing where it's like, you don't fucking bother. Like, Georgia, is a state that's been contested. Georgia has like unbelievably intense and high rates of voter participation, especially compared to New York, because in New York, you kind of know like your vote doesn't matter because the fix is in anyway, and then like they're gonna lose tons of votes. There's Bernie votes from the 2016 primary that went missing that have never been counted. So it's like we're actually in a mega democratic moment now where more people are voting than ever.
All right, democracy is, voting is the final step in that process of democracy.
Right.
And more voting, like on paper, I guess, is good.
Yeah, it's more engagement.
But everything that goes on behind that and into that decision of who to vote for and choose the candidates and all that stuff,
it's got to change.
Yeah, the fact that a total mentally ill conspiracy theorist is sitting 2 seats from the president of the United States at the Republican convention.
Yeah,
this is something different.
Yeah,
and
it's not good.
In 2028, maybe he's going to be sitting right next, or even be the candidate.
So the other thing I was going to say, okay, this is what democracy looks like, and it's it's kind of like it's ugly, right? Yeah. Or it's not pretty yet. The other thing is the solution to this, of course, is if we adopt a broadly libertarian view and say a government at all levels has less control over how you live your life, we can relax a little bit, because then every election isn't quite, the end or the beginning of, the end of everything that is good and decent or the beginning of a new tyranny. It's like, what if the government was half the size it was and focused on people who actually need help? We'd have a better economy, we'd have fewer poor people, and we wouldn't be at each other's throats because we would be arguing over tastes and preference rather than, the one law that we all have to live by.
Nick, I don't know how much thought you've ever given to your underwear.
All the time.
It's just kind of like you had a telephone or a cell phone, and then the iPhone came out. You haven't really thought. But it's time to take a moment to thank Sheath Underwear, the official underwear of comedy, for sponsoring the show today. Sheath makes boxers, briefs, and trunks for men, and makes bralettes, bikinis, and boy shorts for women. Sheath sent us over their underwear. This is true. They sent me some underwear. I had never known that underwear could be like this. I'm embarrassed to say it in front of Nick, but it has like a pouch to hold your junk and take the weight off. And it's actually I would say it's a what's the expression for like when a new design just changes everything? It's like a seminal.
I hope not. Is it easy to clean?
It's easy to clean. And so they sent us over some underwear. It's with a 2-pouch design, 1 pouch to keep the bead bag in place and 1 to keep the flagpole in the ground. I cannot endorse it enough. I want more pair of Sheath underwear. I desperately hope that we can please them with our endorsements so that we'll keep the underwear coming. Go to sheathunderwear.com/seller or use the code seller at checkout to get 20% off your first order. Each order includes Sheath's 100% money back guarantee. Again, for 20% off your first order, sheathunderwear.com/seller or promo code seller at checkout. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Periel. You're going to get some bralettes. Don't you have to have small? What's a bralette?
A bralette is like you have to have like little boobies, I think, to have.
The bralettes are not meant for you.
Yeah, I don't think so.
My wife could maybe wear.
Yeah, your wife.
Are you sure they weren't meant for you? A lot of men.
They're meant for anyone who has small boobies. And how does Sheath feel?
I said it feels great. She's the worst.
What is it made out of?
It's made out of a modal and elastane fabric blend. That's too chemist for me, but it's breathable and apparently it's antimicrobial, which is very important for people like me.
Yeah.
And it keeps you cool, chafe free.
Yeah, I that's like a thing for you guys. Like if the underwear isn't soft enough, you get chafed. Is that right? Like if it rubs up again.
I haven't had feeling below my nipples in like 20 years, but I could see that.
Well, I'm half black, from the waist up. So anyway,
that is. I'm going to think about that.
About the sheath underwear.
Yeah.
All right. What else is on your? We're just about wrapping it up. You're such an interesting guest. I can't believe it took all these years to strike up a good relationship with you like this. But what else is?
Well, thank you for that. But this is like an incredible enjoyment. I
have a question.
Yeah.
Do you sense that the stigma of supporting Trump is melting away?
Yes.
This is a huge event because Trump's policies, as you already alluded to, and I feel the same way, in general, they're closer to what most people prefer.
Well, in an interview that I did of you for the Reason interview, you, at the end, you insisted we were ready to pack up and go home. And he was like, wait, I have this Trump-like speech.
Oh, yeah.
Sheafs of paper that he had written in, when he was in second grade or something. But no, I think it's a couple of things. And also this, I don't think it's going to last, but Trump being more conciliatory because he can also he senses that he's going to win. So he can be kind of a decent guy, at least for a while. Assuming that holds up.
It's like the guard in Schindler's List who tries to be nice for a while.
Yeah, no.
He goes right back to it.
He governed essentially as a kind of, center-right Republican. It wasn't, he wasn't off the, he wasn't totally off the reservation. I mean, I find his immigration stances and policies awful. I find his hatred of free trade really disturbing and problematic. I'm not a Trump guy, but he wasn't like in a totally different, universe from what we might have expected. And the economy before COVID, and he was not good on COVID, actually. He's the one who called for the 2 weeks, shutdown and all of that kind of crap. But he, the economy was doing pretty well under him. So I think a lot of people who are not super ideological are like, okay, well, between, demented Biden and Trump, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I didn't mean to compare him to a Nazi. Anyway, that wasn't the point.
Because if he was a Nazi, then you would be right.
I don't want to get him killed.
Yeah,
but there's two causation issues. We don't know the answer. One is that the economy was better under Trump. I tend to think it had something to do with Trump. And two is that the world was more stable under Trump.
Yeah,
and which is insane.
It's not crazy to think that had something to do with Trump.
Well, I think in the presidential debate when he said, Putin wouldn't have invaded Ukraine, you can't prove that, but it's I think most people are like, yeah, that was probably right.
Yeah, there's a good chance.
Yeah, because
Hamas not invading is less likely.
Yeah, although one of the things that you gotta, you or I think everybody should give to Trump is the Abraham Accords. And of course, it's interesting that Ivanka and Jared Kushner, it's like they don't exist in this current iteration of Trump, they've gone missing. And Kushner was supposedly a big pusher of the Abraham Accords, but the Abraham Accords was the most significant kind of change in the Middle East in years, in decades for us, in a generally positive direction, and that was Trump. So he was not by any stretch a disaster or reckless. He forced NATO countries to cough up a little bit more money. I don't know, and it's weird because this is where when, one of the other things is we look at Biden and we're like, oh my God, this guy is he's a mannequin. He's going to be wheeled directly to the Walt Disney Hall of Presidents and just wired up for.
No, it's Weekends at Bernie's.
Yeah, well, but Trump is also very old, and then is he is he going to be calling all of the shots or not? Because somebody like J.D. Vance, and the vice president doesn't really matter unless the president dies, but J.D. Vance is, very pro-Israel apparently, but he's super anti-Ukraine. And, how is all of this stuff going to play out? And I'm not even saying one thing is better than the other. It's like it remains unsettled what Trump's second administration agenda would really look like or what he would be able to do.
Do you have an opinion on Ukraine?
I think it's very important for Ukrainians to not, I think it's great that they have held off Russia as far as they have. I think the United States should be helpful to them, but I am worried by the amount of aid that we give them, short of having actual defense agreements with them. And and this isn't to say like, the people in Ukraine should pay for the 25 years where we dicked around and didn't actually update NATO or create a better system for European self-defense against bad actors like Putin. But I'm impressed by Ukraine, and I think the U.S., there are many reasons why the U.S. should want Ukraine to retain its integrity.
Let's say money was not an issue, in some way.
Yeah.
Just the people dying and the risk of things escalating, instability to the world. Your president, what I think most people will come around to, we kind of thought maybe Ukraine might just pull this off, and maybe they're gonna a coup will come up against Putin, and maybe he has pancreatic cancer. Maybe I don't think anybody's really thinking that way anymore.
Right.
So,
I mean, I think
what
is going to happen, and I and this is also something where, because we don't have any faith in our institutions, like the U.S., to the extent that it's involved, it should be working to end the conflict. And I think that is also, like, I don't think that Putin is trying to take over Europe. He may well be trying to pencil back in the contours of the Soviet Union. And I think he's awful and evil and rotten. I do not think he poses a threat to the American way of life in a way that many people do. And I think we should be more thoughtful with our treasure, and especially with our troops, which really aren't there.
So maybe J.D. Vance's actual...
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not saying I disagree with him on that. I disagree with the way he talks about it, because I find it disturbing to me when people, don't stand up for, I'm a broken record on this. Like, I'm 2 generations removed from being in shithole countries that were brutally occupied, by either foreign or native-born tyrants. And it's like, I'm a libertarian. I believe that everybody should have a right to self-determination. So, like, I want Ukraine to survive, and I think Putin is an awful, even human being. And
on the other issues that you mentioned, so immigration, I feel like it almost doesn't matter what one thinks, that we will need the immigrants, and therefore business and influential people will impose themselves on government to allow the immigrants. If they were to close off the borders today, very soon we'd be screaming for immigrants.
But we've kind of been doing that. I was just looking at this, like when you look at, and this, by the way, is part of where Trump in the debate, and actually before the debate, he was on All In. It's like a Silicon Valley podcast.
I didn't see it, but I saw that he was on there.
Yeah, and he was talking about, he basically agreed with the idea that anybody who gets an associate's degree, a BA, or an advanced degree should get a green card stapled to their diploma, like if you're a foreigner. And that's actually a pretty good idea. I think it doesn't go far enough, but like if he starts talking about immigration like that, and we do need to secure.
By the way, he's always talked about it like that. I got to send you a get up. There was a podcast in 2015 with him and Steve Bannon about immigration, where Trump was disagreeing with Bannon.
Right.
Bannon had this.
That's one of the reasons why Ann Coulter turned on Trump, because he didn't build the wall and he wasn't draconian enough on actually sealing.
Do you know her, by the way?
I do. Yeah.
She's a very nice person.
She's a wonderful person, on a personal level. But I was in the free press debate on immigration that was held in Dallas a couple months ago, and her policies are objectively racist now. Like, she thinks certain people from certain countries because of the character of those people should not be allowed into the country. And I find that despicable. Like it's, I reject that completely.
Yeah.
Having said
I've
that,
heard
I
that
mean,
debate.
if Trump acts more, everybody understands you need to secure the border because it's chaos and it causes more human misery. I mean, like, how fucked up is it that poor people from developing countries will pay 15 grand to get smuggled into here? Like, among other, any other things, like, why isn't the government collecting that?
Okay,
If
but
they're willing to do that. But the only way you're going to ease the border is by giving more people, like, and the vast majority of people who want to come here legally, a way to get here legally, and they'll queue up. Nobody wants to, walk through a desert and get raped by coyotes and give all of your life savings and lose a child in order to get to America and get like a shitty single room occupancy room, in New York for a couple months or something like that. Like, we need to fix immigration.
But at any level of immigration and any policy that we're serious about, at some point, you reach the limit where you have to say, no, that's it.
Yeah.
That's the last one. And then inevitably more people do get in. And then either you deport them or you're not serious about the policy to begin with.
If we made it, and the Libertarian Party candidate, who is, I think, is a nice guy and a good spokesman for a broadly libertarian point of view, I am afraid, even there's factions in the Libertarian Party that are denouncing him. So he's got a tough sled. But his immigration thing is we need a 21st century version of Ellis Island, which is basically if, you come here, you get vetted. If you're not, if you don't have a communicable disease, if you're wearing nice underwear, and you don't have a criminal record, you can come here and live and work legally. You don't get welfare, you don't get handouts, and we'll figure that out pretty well. And I think that's generally a good policy.
Unlimited?
We'll see at first. I mean, there's this idea that, all of the, say 200 million people or whatever on the planet that want to migrate, all of them want to come to America and all of them want to come here. It's just not true. Like, let's open it up. We've been giving out 1 million or fewer green cards a year for a long time. We can absorb many more than that. Mm-hmm. I think one of the reasons why the Silicon Valley people are kind of giving money to Trump is because they understand, they need high-skilled workers, and actually lots of industries need low-skilled workers. And I think they realize they can work with Trump on that. But we could scale up, and then, like, if we're admitting, I don't know, legally 10 million people a year, and it starts to become a problem, then we can say, okay, we're gonna scale it back, but we're not even close to that.
Oh, well, so, and then free trade, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a businessman. I'm a huge believer in free trade, although
you want those non-English speaking comedians to come here because they will work for less.
I want
wages.
a tariff on them. But I always wonder about this tariff issue. I saw an article recently. They say the tariffs cost the average American $650 a year. That's way less than they wanted to charge the average New Yorker for congestion pricing. So,
right, yeah.
So
for those new garbage bins.
Yeah. So the question is, what do we get for that $650? I'm not completely convinced that there aren't some benefits to that. It's over my head. But anyway, that's on one side. On the other side,
by the way, Trump and Biden are, in the debate, one of the things Trump was like, like Joe Biden didn't repeal the tariffs I put into place. No, he believes in them. Yeah, so it's like, okay, this is getting a little bit
so the tariffs may be an impurity in the ideology. I'm not sure about that, but Biden just put that all in the back burner when he came out for national rent control.
Yeah. Which
is a free trade issue also.
Absolutely. And this is one of the reasons why I think when you get away from the kind of the bluster and the culture war aspects of things, which are important, but generally, they don't get solved by politics. Biden in his time in office, everywhere there is a knob where you can turn it down to kind of make economic activity a little bit harder, he's doing that. Including stuff like yeah, okay, let's have national rent control. What could that possibly mean? And everybody knows that rent control is a terrible policy that hurts poor people the most.
Everybody.
And it just creates, a scarcity in housing. It doesn't help. And that, that's deeply worrying. But he does that with, big companies and small companies. He wants more, people have to go through more hoops in order to start businesses. It is true that, in various ways, the economy has picked up from when he took office because we were coming out of COVID and things like that. But the people around him, and we assume the people around him are going to be more and more powerful, most of them are very hostile to free enterprise. And and Trump is no saint on this, but I think he's clearly less insane on free enterprise.
Oh, there's no question in mind. Biden's been in the Senate since what year? 1970?
He took office in 73.
So 73. And I don't even know if he ever worked a day in his life before that. He was in law school. I mean,
Yeah.
Trump spent a life in the marketplace.
Yeah. And he's come around on, kind of like he's more amenable to things like Bitcoin and, because Trump, one of his problems is he's like, oh, I'm just like a real estate guy. He doesn't like finance. He doesn't like anything else. It's kind of coming around to that. He also said, and this matters to me, he said he would pardon Ross Ulbricht.
That matters to me too. The
guy.
Silk Road. That's an outrage.
Yeah, no, it's terrifying and horrifying that happened.
It also, it's a whole other podcast. It also exposes a part of the judicial system, which is just outrageous, that they can sentence you worse based on things they never have to prove in court.
That's right.
Which is just outrageous.
Oh, and the sentencing, or the judge in her sentencing statement, and this became a contretemps reason. She spent most of the time lecturing Ross Ulbricht, not saying, okay, this is what you were actually found guilty of, and this is why I'm sentencing you. It was the idea that who were you to think that you could create a place where people could peaceably, trade illegal drugs or, and do something outside of the government's purview. It was like very ideological. We had, speaking of political violence, on our site, we had a couple of commenters who started making jokes about putting judges in wood chippers and like what's the most efficient way to kill judges. And we ended up getting subpoenaed by the Southern District of New York, the federal court. And it ended up becoming an interesting kind of discussion about free speech on the internet and things like that. But Ross Ulbricht is, some of the times, you think about, who are the people who are like the unacknowledged creators of the future who get fucked over, and like he may well, I hope this doesn't happen, but he may well die in jail by the time that everybody is buying drugs, legal and illegal, and there's no distinction, using Bitcoin online. And they're much better, and nobody overdoses from tainted drugs and things like that. And he may not be free. It's sickening.
Yeah. I think there's a documentary about his case on YouTube. I think I'm remembering right.
There's more than a few probably, but Alex Winter, from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure,
maybe that's
did
the one.
Very good one a few years ago.
Everybody should watch it. It's really a blight on the American system. And I don't see how anybody can defend it.
And also given the fact that he's been in jail for years now, I think more than a decade, or he just crossed like a decade, whereas people who have just done heinous crimes have gotten out
all the time.
Yeah,
all the time. Where they people traumatize people for life just by smashing them over the head with something in a robbery, and literally they don't go to jail.
Right.
Oh, you didn't die. So it's not a anyway. Just to finish up, and then we got to go. So my basic take on Trump is that any guy who's run businesses and his basic gut instincts. Now, many small-minded people think, well, if it was good for the rich guy, it can't be good for the little guy. That's the little guy. That's not the case. In reality, although you might want to change the weights a little bit, when companies do well, they end up employing a lot of people and wealth is created. And he understands how regulation and everything that goes on that the government does by 1,000 cuts kills innovation and industry and economic prosperity. And I mean, we could talk ourselves into voting for the guy. I wish he wasn't just such a
Yeah.
erratic, boorish,
Yeah.
dishonest
I also,
guy.
to the extent, and my colleague Matt Welch wrote a good piece about how the pick of J.D. Vance doesn't, it doesn't really matter much in terms of like electability in that, but it signifies that Trumpism is going to be the future of the Republican Party. And I wish that Trump, to the extent that he has changed the Republican Party, and he's pulled it away from any kind of explicit small government libertarian kind of free market, laissez-faire, let people alone kind of rhetoric, because it's very culture war stuff. That's bothersome to me, but I wish that Trump was more of the person that you're talking about, where he's like, the most important thing is to let people, kind of get on with their lives and their businesses, and a lot of other things get taken
But
care
the
of.
justices he appoints on the Supreme Court are very much putting the country in that
They
direction.
seem to be, between, a couple of rulings, particularly like the Chevron defense stuff and kind of getting rid of the administrative state. I mean, it's fascinating that the case that ended Chevron deference, which, is about where the government, government agencies can't make up rules, in order to fill in gaps that, that case was based on a policy that Trump had put into place. So he, Steve Bannon had said, Trump is going to deconstruct the administrative state, and he didn't really. But this is, we have two bad choices, but I don't think, it's hard for me to see how Biden, even independent of the mental problems, which are pretty overwhelming, I don't, Biden has much more to answer for.
Yeah. All right, Nick, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
And, when I suggested, why don't you get Nick to come on? I'm thinking, I don't want to keep imposing on the guy to come on the show, but I actually get the feeling that you don't mind.
That I don't have anything else going on in my life.
No, that you enjoy-
I'm hanging upside down in a closet just waiting for the call. Yeah.
That you enjoy shooting the shit, and if it's in front of a microphone, why not?
Yeah.
So that's a great relationship. We're very happy to have that relationship with you with
Thank
the
you.
show.
That means a lot to me.
All right. Good night, everybody. Get your sheath underwear. Bye.
Thank you one final time to Sheath Underwear for sponsoring Live from the Table. Don't forget to visit sheathunderwear.com/seller today to get 20% off your first order. Support the show and your balls with Sheath Underwear.
Very, very good.
Thank you.
Okay, we done?
No, yeah. And then we're going to do the